Hi there, welcome to this lesson. In the previous lesson, we continued learning about the single row functions, and more specifically, we were looking at string-based functions, where the input was a series of characters or words, things on the keyboard, you wrap them in quotes, just literal strings. Those were the inputs to the functions, right? In this lesson, we're going to learn about another category of single row functions. It's actually going to be two categories, numeric functions and date functions, both very important, especially the date one. You're going to be dealing a lot with dates as an Oracle SQL developer. So let's get numeric functions out of the way first. Numeric functions accept numbers as their argument, okay? And they're used to conduct mathematical type operations like rounding or finding the seal or the floor of a number, just basic arithmetic stuff. You can actually look this up. These are not very important. This is stuff that you can quickly learn from Tech on the Net website that I introduced you. There's various numeric functions, but we're going to look at a few basic ones, and then we're going to move on to a more important topic, which is dates. The first one we'll look at is for rounding integers, and it's of course called the round function. The first argument to this function is the number that we want to round up, and the second argument to this function is the number of places, the places of after the decimal point that we want to round. And this is also referred to as precision, points after the decimal point. So for example, let's say that we want to round the number 107.088 by 2 decimal places. I can have a select statement, and then I would call the round function, and the first argument is the number that we want to round, which is 107.088, and I want to round it by 2 decimal places. Okay, from dual. We don't need to query a specific table. We're just going to test this function out. That's why I'm using the dual table. So highlight that and hit run. And notice that this returns 107.09. And the reason is we are rounding to the second position after the decimal point, and that's this digit right here, the number 8. So what Oracle is going to do is it's going to look at the number that follows it and checks whether this number, which happens to also be 8, if this is greater than or equal to 5, only then it's going to promote this if the number that follows it is greater than or equal to 5. Okay, if I put the number 3 here, I want to round 3 decimal places, highlight that and hit run. Notice that nothing changes. The number is returned as is. If I had, for example, the number 7 here, well, this is greater than 5, so the third position after the decimal point will be promoted. So 0 is the first position, 8 is the second position, 8 here is the third position. This is actually going to be promoted because the number that follows it is greater than or equal to 5. So highlight this and hit run, and notice that 0, 8, 9 has been promoted, right? So this number has been promoted. So that's the whole gist of rounding. This is basic arithmetic, so you should already know this. Now, if I round without giving the second parameter, right, where I don't give a precision, and I just round this as is, highlight that and hit run, notice that it's just going to return the whole number, all right? So if I don't give a precision after this, if I don't give the number of decimal places as the second argument, it's just going to give me the rounded whole number. So in this case, it's just 107. If I remove this and put a 9 here, for example, .9, highlight that and hit run, this is going to promote that to 108. The next numeric function that I want to go over is called trunc. And it basically truncates or removes the first argument to the number of places defined by the second argument. Okay? So, for example, let me get rid of this round here and change that to trunc. And if I have a bunch of, after the decimal point, if I have a bunch of integers like that, and I do from dual, let's highlight that and hit run, notice that it's actually just going to give me 107. It didn't even round it up. Even though after the decimal point, this is actually greater than or equal to 5, it did not round it up. It just basically truncated the whole decimal portion of this number. All right, that's what trunc does. You can also give it a second argument. If I put, for example, the number 3, well, this is going to keep up to, after the decimal point, up to 3 spaces. So it's going to keep these numbers, 1, 2, 3, it's going to return basically this digit, 107.938. So that's what trunc is going to do. It's going to keep these numbers but truncate everything else after the third position, after the decimal point. So highlight that and hit run, and notice that it is in fact doing 107.938. Okay, and it's important to note that trunc does not round numbers. It just basically truncates or removes things based on these parameters. If we give it a parameter such as 3 or 5, that's how many decimal places it'll go up to, and then truncate the rest, remove the rest. All right. If we don't give an argument, it's just going to completely ignore decimals and give us just a whole number, as you can see right there. Now, there are various other numeric functions you can learn about. If you go to Tech on the Net, this is the website that I introduced you in the previous lesson. If you go to Oracle PL SQL section up here and go to the function section, there are different categories here. And these are string character functions. We've only taken a look at maybe 5 or 6 of these, but those are the important ones I want you to learn. A lot of this other stuff you barely will get to use, but it's important to know that they're there. So review those, and then there's also numeric mathematical functions, and notice that there's a bunch of them, okay? Such as absolute value, there is ceil and exp for exponential, and just a bunch of mathematical stuff here you can look at. It's not important to know all of these, but it's important to know that you do have these options, these different functions available to you in case that you have some mathematical problems to solve. But now it's time to move on to more important functions called the date time functions, okay? And I'm going to be going over how dates work in Oracle. So let's get to that. So going back to the SQL command line here, let's work on our first function, and that's going to be called sysdate. And we could just do select sysdate from dual. And since this function does not require any arguments, we don't need to give any parentheses here. We just use this as if it was some kind of column. So highlight this and hit run, and notice that it gives the date of where this system is installed, right? So this returns the current date that is set on the operating system where this particular database is actually installed, okay? In my time right now, it's actually May 25th, but where this is installed, it's already May 26th. So this is actually proof that this database is not running locally. It's running somewhere on the cloud, deployed in some server, somewhere in this world, where the time is actually, May 26th there. The next function I want to take a look at is called system timestamp. It's sys timestamp. That's how you spell it. And you don't need the parentheses in this either because there's no arguments. Highlight this and hit run, and this is actually going to return some more details. Okay, it returns not only the date but also the timestamp, and it comprises of the hours. Okay, these are the hours, the minutes, the seconds, the fraction seconds, whether it's AM or PM, as well as the time zone here. Okay, so the first thing is the date and then all of these details. So this is actually pretty handy to use as well. So wherever this system is installed, it's actually 3:50 in the morning at that part of the world, wherever it is. Now the next function I want to look at is called add months. And this function takes 2 arguments. The first argument is some date, and the second argument is a number representing the months to add to the given date. So let me give you an example. Let's do select add months, and the first argument is some date. So let's give it some date. I'm going to give it November 17, 2012, for example. Okay, that's the first argument, and we need to wrap it in these quotes here. Okay, when we're dealing with dates, we need to wrap them in quotes. They're almost like strings. The second argument is a number in months, and we could do from dual. So highlight this and hit run, and notice that it's going to actually add the number of months to this date. So notice that it advanced to February 17, 2013. It moved from November to February by adding 3 months to this date. Now the cool thing is I can go back in time, right? So this is giving me some time in the past this particular date. I can go before this date as well. I could do -3, and that will take me 3 months before November. So highlight that and hit run, and notice that this is actually taking me into August. All right. So you can use this second parameter, or argument rather, to go further by a certain number of months, or before this date, or sometime in the past. So instead of giving this string, I could just invoke the sysdate function, can't I? Right? This will also give me the date. So highlight this and hit run. This is going to take us 3 months into the past. So the year that this is being recorded is 2016, and the month is actually May, but it's taking me 3 months into the past. It took me into February with this minus. Now I can go into the future, put +3 there. You don't even need the plus sign. Without the plus sign, it's considered positive. But let me just put that there. It's going to take me into the future, into August. The number representing the date does not change, but the month here does. And in the case that we go, for example, 100 months into the future, of course, the year should also reflect this future. So hit run and notice that we end up in 2024. God knows where we'll be at that date, but it's fascinating to think about it. But anyway, that wraps up this particular method. Let's move on to the next method. That is called months between. So let me change this add months thing to months between. Okay, and I'm purposely leaving some of these capital and some of them lowercase. These functions can be also invoked in capital, right? So instead of having lowercase months between, I can also do like this. This is perfectly legal. All right, so I keep changing the case here and there just so that I keep reminding you that this is a case insensitive language. So we need to, months between function takes 2 arguments. The first argument is a particular date, and the second argument is also a particular date. And you guessed it, this function is going to return the number of months between the 2 given dates. So let's say we pick a date such as December 15, 2012. And the second argument is going to be December 4th, 2013, for example. Okay, make sure you close off this closing quote. Dates in SQL are often mentioned in these quotes. Okay, so this one also needs a closing quote right there. So now we can highlight this and hit run, and this should give us the number of months between these 2 dates. So notice what's peculiar about this is it's giving us a -11. So it's pretty close to 12 months. The number of days between these dates are sort of fractioned off into approximate number of months. So that's 0.6. So almost a little over a half a month between these days. So it's basically giving us 11.64 months between these 2 dates. And notice that there's a negative here. And the reason for that is basically it takes this date and it subtracts this date from it. So obviously this is a smaller date and this is a larger date. So when you subtract a larger thing from a smaller thing, you get a negative. So if you want to see this as a positive number, you could just switch this around and give the larger date first and the smaller date after that. And now it's going to give us a positive number, but the same exact number will be shown, 11.645 or whatever. Okay? So this gives us the months between 2 given dates. Now, if the date is exactly the same, December 4th, 2013, 2012, this should give us 12 months. And as you can see, it is giving us that. Now, the next function we want to look at is called trunc. And you might recall just a few minutes ago, we were going over trunc and we were passing in a number to it. Well, trunc can also accept date, and it essentially does a similar kind of thing where it reduces or removes unnecessary information. And in the example when we were trunking numbers, right, we don't want anything past the decimal points, it was eliminating that, and we would give a second argument. Well, in this case, we can use trunc for dates, and let me show you exactly how that works. So we can do select trunc, and I will give the sys timestamp Remember, this was the most detailed type of date that we've seen from dual. Okay, so it's going to give the exact timestamp, but then we're trunking it, and we'll see what happens. So highlight that and hit run, and notice that it eliminates all of the extra stuff. So we don't have the hours, we don't have the time, the minutes, the milliseconds, the time zone. Because if you remember, if we just do select timestamp from dual, it gives a lot of other details about the time. So highlight that and notice that it gives all of these details. But when you call trunk on this timestamp, it just basically trunks to the given date. Okay. Now, the second argument it can take is of type string as well, and it could be, for example, month or year. Okay, these are the two arguments we can give this function, and this will basically give us the first date of the year. So highlight that and hit run, and we are currently in 2016. So notice it took us all the way back to January 1st, 2016, and currently at the time of this video, it's May. So if I change this from year to month, this will give us the first of the month. So highlight that and hit run, and this will basically give us the 1st of May 2016. Okay, so we can give a particular date as well. For example, instead of giving sys date or some other timestamp, I can use the higher date column. Remember, we have a higher date column in the emp table. So highlight that and hit run, and notice that this will give us the first of every month that our employees were hired. Just for comparison, let me actually put the higher date column here so that you can compare what's going on here. Highlight that and hit run, and notice that this employee was hired on the 17th of November, but we're just going to November 1st and so on. You can see the comparisons here. Okay. And just to see what who those employees were, you can have another column and highlight that and hit run. And there you go. You can see all the data here. And just to summarize, you can also call functions in the where clause. So I can do where hire date, and I can do trunk hire date, and I only want to get employees that were hired in a given year, for example. So I can do year here, and I want to get those employees that were hired in 1982, for example. Then I would do this, 0101 1982. Okay, so it's going to give me all of those employees that were hired on this given year, and I'm using the trunk function in the where clause. Okay, so highlight this and hit run, and notice that it gives me Scott and Miller. This particular representation is just giving me the first of the particular month that they were hired. But guess what? Both of them were hired in 1982, and this query is doing exactly that. Now, these were all single row functions that we've been covering. The trunk, the concat, the trim, and lpad, and substring. These are all single row functions, meaning you give one input row to the function and it returns a single output. Single row functions. And that is why we can use these functions in the where clause, because the where clause filters every record, right? Record by record is being checked before the data is returned. And the records that match the particular condition, those are the records that get returned. So you can call these functions in the where clause because these are considered single row functions. But pretty soon we're going to go into more advanced functions that are often used in statistics and aggregate data. And those are referred to as grouping functions. And those are not allowed in the where clause. We're going to actually look at those pretty soon. I just want to take one more lesson on certain functions that are particular to dates. We're not done with dates yet. This is a big topic. It's very important. So there's a few more single row functions relating to dates that we will cover in the next lesson. And when we're through with that, you will be ready for aggregates and grouping functions, which is going to give you a lot of horsepower in the SQL language. So stay tuned. I'll see you soon.